Today, we're going deep. We're launching an investigation into the hidden history of our most basic beliefs, our ideas about right and wrong. And our guide on this journey? None other than Friedrich Nietzsche and his genealogy of morals.
Right out of the gate, Nietzsche hits us with a question that should just stop you in your tracks. What if everything you've ever been taught about morality isn't some divine truth, but actually a human invention? What if it's a weapon forged in a secret ancient war for power? This single question is the key to our entire investigation.
To even begin to understand this hidden war, Nietzsche says we first have to look at the one fundamental human drive. And he argues it's not survival, it's not happiness, it's what he calls the will to power. Think of it as this raw, unstoppable energy to grow, to dominate, to create. It's the force that shapes all of life.
Okay, but what happens when that will to power gets blocked? When it's oppressed and denied? Well, it doesn't just vanish. No, it curdles. It turns into something else. It becomes resentment, a bitter, kind of poisonous hatred of the powerful coming from the powerless. And this emotion, Nietzsche says, is a force that literally reshaped the world.
And the final ingredient in this psychological cocktail is fear. Fear of the strong, fear of pain, even fear of life itself. So you've got these three things: the will to power, resentment, and fear. These are the keys that are going to unlock the whole history of our values.
So this brings us to the first major battlefield in this war of values. Nietzsche points to two competing moral systems. You can think of it like an original operating system, and then a brilliant, subversive hack that came along and completely rewrote the code.
And this slide really lays it all out. On one side, you had master morality. This was the code of the ancient nobles, the warriors. For them, good was simple. It meant strong, proud, powerful. Anything that was weak or pitiful, well, that was just bad. But then, everything gets flipped on its head. Slave morality comes along, born from the oppressed. Since they couldn't win a physical fight, they won a moral one. They redefined the master's strength as evil and cleverly reframed their own weakness and humility as good.
And let's be super clear here. This wasn't some physical uprising with swords and shields. No, this was a psychological revolt, a slow, quiet, but devastating re-engineering of the human soul itself, where weakness was brilliantly rebranded as a virtue.
But how do you make this new morality actually stick? How do you get people to control themselves from the inside out? Well, let's move on to the next phase of this investigation and see how the incredibly powerful weapon of guilt was first forged.
Nietzsche identifies this sickness that he calls the bad conscience. Here's what it is. It's what happens when all our natural, aggressive, power-seeking instincts have nowhere to go. They can't be expressed outwardly anymore, so they turn inward. We start to attack and punish ourselves. You can almost see the process unfold here. I mean, it started out so simple. In early societies, if you hurt someone, you owed a literal physical debt. Justice was external. You paid your dues and it was over. But then religion introduced this masterful concept: an unpayable debt. A debt to God for our very existence, for our supposedly sinful nature. And that right there creates a state of endless guilt, turning our conscience into a permanent internal torture chamber. And that leads us to the final piece of this puzzle, because a world that's now full of guilty, suffering people needs an explanation for all their misery, right? It needs a system that doesn't just justify suffering, but actually makes it feel meaningful. And that system is what Nietzsche calls the ascetic ideal. It was pushed by priests and philosophers for centuries. And it's basically the belief that our instincts, our desires, this world right here, it's all corrupt. True meaning, according to this ideal, is found by denying life, by embracing pain and poverty and humility, all in the hope of some better world later on.
So the ascetic ideal, you see, is both a comfort and a trap. It gives a purpose to suffering that might otherwise feel meaningless. It tells miserable people that their pain isn't a failure. No, it's actually a sign of holiness. Their suffering literally becomes a virtue. And the ultimate result of all of this, humanity's core drive, that very force of life, the will to power, that life-affirming instinct to grow and create, it gets put in chains. It was tamed by guilt and sedated by the promise that suffering was somehow a noble cause.
Now, after digging through all this darkness, you might be thinking Nietzsche's just a complete nihilist. But that's not his goal at all. Unmasking the history of morality is really just step one. Step two is his ultimate challenge to every single one of us.
Look, the point here isn't to argue that we should all just go out and be evil. Not at all. Instead, Nietzsche is begging us to understand where our values came from. He wants to free us from this inherited morality that was born from resentment and fear so that we can finally become conscious creators of our own values.
And so, he turns the spotlight directly on you. I want you to really think about your deepest convictions, what you believe is good and what you believe is right. Are those values the result of your own experience, your own strength, your own way of saying yes to life?
Or are they just inherited chains? Are they values that were designed centuries ago by the powerless to make themselves feel virtuous and by the fearful to make the world feel safe and predictable? This is one of Nietzsche's most famous lines, and it's not about overcoming other people. It's about overcoming this inherited, timid, guilt-ridden version of yourself. It's about seeing humanity not as some finished product, but as a bridge to something greater, something stronger.
And that leaves us right here, with the final, burning question. Nietzsche has laid out the choice. Now that the mask is off, are you going to continue to live by a script that was written by others long, long ago out of their weakness and their spite? Or will you dare to take on the terrifying and exhilarating responsibility of creating your own meaning and forging your own values? The choice is yours.